I was wondering what today's gospel really has to do with these particular happenings in people's lives. I wonder what the gospel has to do with a 91-year-old lady named Vi Burkhart who was dying. Her family gathered around and I anointed her the other evening. Or with Sean Wenzel, 40 years old, struggling with stage 4 colon cancer, somehow hoping that he will be able to see his 2 little boys, Corbin 3 and Connor 7, grow older. What does it have to do with the eruption of violence again in Ferguson? Or I wonder how the gospel affects the family of James Young, killed at Cedar Point this past week. Or name something, maybe in your own family, maybe that's happening with yourself. How does the gospel touch your life? How does the gospel bring comfort or peace or bring life? Jesus tells us today that God really cares. And that Jesus himself is God's pledge to stick with us through it all. Now listen, Jesus says, I am the living bread. Not dead bread, not stale bread, but living bread. A body broken and blood shed for who? For you. For you. Each of you. So we come together today, not in a faint remembrance of Jesus' past life, or a hope for some future life, but we're gathered here, I hope, because we want that life right now. We want to experience that life now. Our world needs to experience that life now. But Jesus' life makes holy the lives he meets. Whether they were on the streets of Galilee or whether they're on the streets of Canton, Ohio, his life makes our world a more holy place. When we encounter him, especially in a world that sometimes is not so holy. But our lives are meant to be bearers of God's promise to the world. Bearers of that promise. And that promise we need to carry out there. If it just stays within these walls, that promise dies. It becomes stale. It becomes dead. It's only when that promise is carried outside of these walls that that promise brings life to the world. That promise that God cares. Because people need to hear that, don't they? People need to believe that. The bread of life puts flesh on God's promise. And where's that flesh? Right here. Look at your hand. Look at your arm. Some of you have more flesh than you should have. But that's the flesh that God puts that promise on us. And it says we need to go out there and reach out and care for one another. The author, Stephen Matson, writes that we do a disservice to the gospel of Jesus by watering down the message of God. A lot of times we water it down just into pious platitudes. And we put those platitudes on holy cards or on walls or on banners. But our Christian life calls us to be specific. Otherwise we forget, or else we just generalize the gospel message. Jesus fits into one size. One size fits all. Everybody loves Jesus. And Jesus tells us that our lives do matter. That every human life matters. But not just in a general, nice way. It's nice to say God loves everybody. God loves humanity. We can all say that. But it's when we get specific that the gospel hits the road. And Jesus shows us that God cares. In fact, Jesus gets so specific that for Jesus, Samaritan lives matter. Children's lives matter. Gentile lives matter. Jewish lives matter. Lepers' lives matter. Women's lives matter. Black lives matter. Unborn babies' lives matter. Struggling mothers' lives matter. Gay and straight lives matter. Elderly lives matter. Addicts' lives matter. And the list goes on and on and on. You have to be specific. So true. Yes, Vi Burkhart's life matters to God. Sean Wenzel's life matters to God. And yes, your life matters. God bless you.